The news that President Trump tested positive for COVID-19 has thrown his re-election campaign into turmoil. While we do not yet know the severity of the president's illness, his campaign team has already canceled his scheduled trips to Florida today and Wisconsin on Saturday. So for more on this, we want to bring in CBS News political analyst Leslie Sanchez. Leslie, we haven't spoken to you in a while, so it's really good to see you. How will the president's diagnosis impact his re-election campaign?
A very important question, Anne-Marie, and I just want to start by saying I join my fellow Americans in praying that the president and the first lady recover and get back to their full health as soon as possible. And that's probably the most important part. Is there's a peak of nationalism where everybody stops what they're doing and realizes the severity. And what people have been saying about this pandemic and COVID-19 the entire time is the virus doesn't care who you are, socioeconomic status. It applies and affects everybody equally. That being said, the campaign is on this thing. We expect, Anne-Marie, to have this ripple effect. We do not yet know what the extent of the exposure is within the campaign, certainly with the high-level operatives. So over the course of the next 48 hours, even beyond that, I would expect to start hearing more individuals who may be testing positive. That's the first shoe to drop. The second is kind of readjusting. There's not a big kind of adjustment in terms of like slowing down these events because the campaign had already had them due to the pandemic at a slower pace. There were not as many rallies as you would see in a traditional 2016 environment, and it's very digital. So the positive side of this is there's a very strong apparatus within the GOP, within the RNC, and certainly within the campaign that has a lot of touch points digitally with voters, and that's going to be activated. It's already in kind of a hyper mode. It will be activated even more so now that the president can't be there personally.
You know, it's something that you just said, Leslie, which is what we're seeing playing out across the political spectrum today, which is everybody, certainly people who are close to the president, who are members of his own party, but also Democrats, starting with the vice president, former Vice President Joe Biden, Senator Kamala Harris, all wishing the president of the United States and First Lady Melania Trump a speedy recovery. An entire nation wishes the same for the commander-in-chief. The question, of course, going forward becomes one of how will things play out. So are you hearing that there will be any change in the debate schedule, for example?
Right. Right now, it's a bit too soon to tell. And Vlad, as you likely know, with individuals who've tested positive, it just depends on the severity of it. At that point, your 13 days is kind of a toss-up of whether he would be capable and able to do something like this. But anybody who has recovered, again, depending on the severity, it's going to really determine. This could be something that for the next 3 weeks really handicaps the president's campaign. And then again, it puts a lot more pressure on the surrogates, on the outside apparatus to bolster that the president is getting healthy, that he's looking forward. It's going to be a conflicting pressures on governance and certainly on the campaign. And they're going to be kind of doing this on the whim, not by day, Vlad, but by the hour.
Do you think that this is going to push a conversation about the coronavirus, the pandemic, the way this administration has handled it, push the conversation in a different direction than what we've been hearing so far from the president?
Not for Republicans, Anne-Marie. I've talked to some individuals like state party leaders this morning. It's kind of the diehard, the base of the party. They know where they're going to go. And even people who've been disappointed in the president's leadership on a host of issues look at the alternative of Biden and don't see much choice. There's not a lot of light there in terms of a really viable option for them for a lot of the economic reasons, the Affordable Care Act issues, and losing private insurance, kind of all the policy issues related to that. So on style, the president's going to be the president. He's a fighter. He's somebody who's going to come out and try to look. It's going to be interesting how he manages quarantine and how he responds to that. But I think the conversation, the Democrats would certainly like to see it go there. The president, it's hard to say if he's going to have some humility now with respect to wearing masks and doing the things that CDC has requested and recommended, and people have been wringing their hands, Republicans certainly, that the president would follow those guidelines. But where does that end up? Pull all that aside. it's still an issue, as it stands today, of these two candidates and a very clear choice for many Republicans. So I think they're going to turn out in larger numbers. It's just this fog that we're going to be in for the next several weeks.
But to just continue on the point that on Anne-Marie's line of track, Leslie, do you think, though, that we will see at least a commonality in the messaging when it comes to COVID-19? In other words, the former Vice President Biden, suggesting that wearing masks is effective, washing your hands, social distancing, that it's not a hoax, that it's a real thing, that people of all ages can be infected and can die. Will we see the messaging from the Trump campaign change with regards to that? Perhaps they won't hold these big rallies indoors. Perhaps they will tell people to wear masks, and they will also instruct governors where necessary in states where you're seeing spikes that they should implement harsher and stricter guidelines to prevent people from spreading the virus. In other words, they can disagree on policy, they can disagree on the Supreme Court, on Judge Amy Coney Barrett, they can disagree on national security, on taxes, but on this one thing, Republicans and Democrats, starting with the President of the United States, saying, yeah, these things we agree with because this is what our public health officials like Dr. Fauci and others are saying. And I know because of the situation that I'm in.
Right. We're hoping we have that moment of truth, like in the third act of a play, right? I don't see that plan. That would make for great theater. But at this point, we're still in the cliffhanger. And this is not a president who's going to come forward, in my opinion, just based on personality and what we know about him. It's going to say a mea culpa, I understand, should have been wearing a mask. Because he would say, like he did in the debate, I have a mask, it's my preference, I've chosen to do it this way. These are really good questions for people all around the bubble of the president, too, whether it's his family or top aides who chose not to wear, relied on the fact they were taking tests to think that was security enough and still be exposed to so many individuals in the public. Like, this system is flawed. It has failed. But he does have a CDC. He does have Dr. Fauci. He does have other reliable sources that have come forward and kind of set out a set of norms for how we protect ourselves. It was the president's choice on what he chose to do with his inner circle. And now that actually, the argument being made, that put a lot of us in jeopardy, meaning the whole country. So we can wrangle around those issues, but I don't expect the president to all of a sudden have that moment.
UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson had been accused of downplaying the virus, and then he got sick and had to be hospitalized. And certainly afterwards, there was a shift in the way the UK handled the coronavirus. But Boris Johnson also sort of enjoyed a bit of a boost as a result. You have your finger on the pulse of Republican voters. Do you think that this may actually help to bolster or solidify support for the president amongst Republican voters? I don't know, because, we've already talked about the fact that most people have already decided who they're going to vote for, so it may not make much of a difference at all.
Right, that majority that hasn't decided, Anne-Marie, is absolutely minuscule, de minimis in the terms of like how our polling looks and where you expect. It's a turnout game. It's an activation game. It's making sure that you go. So we're not going to know till probably October 15th or so. If on the generic ballot you're within about 4 points of these in these competitive areas, then it's a race, and we're really going to know where this lines up. What this does do in this moment, which is a fleeting moment, is have a sense of nationalism. People come together, concerned for the presidency, concerned for the next, what's happening to the state of the country and our vulnerabilities. That is this aura that there could be a potential bounce, like a sway. But what it does do is that it does two things. One, when these types of things happen historically, it causes everybody to freeze in the moment. They protect their money, they protect their home, they protect their lifestyle. Like, they are in a moment of protecting because of the uncertainty, which means they're not likely to change mid-track a president, even despite the circumstance, because they don't know what the alternative would be. And with Biden, another candidate who is potentially vulnerable as well, not only because of his exposure to the president, but age issues and all of these other issues that are realities for all of us. The question is, what is the alternative so dramatically different? Because it can't be a 50-50, Anne-Marie, going into this election in terms of one or the other. It has to be an extreme contrast for people for Republicans to feel secure in moving to that alternative. I don't see that happening even in this circumstance over the next several weeks.
Leslie Sanchez. Yeah.
Let me just say yeah.
Yeah, that's good. because
tomorrow, whole new day.
Yeah, my rejoinder to that and how I was going to sort of end this segment, Leslie, was to say, you're probably right, but given all the things that, I think you and Linda Tran, our friend, posted, I think maybe it was Linda who posted a photo of all of us back in 2016 at the 2016 debates. And, there's so much, it's been, I can't just imagine from where that moment was to where we are today and all the things that have happened that we could have never potentially imagined. So who knows? We really don't know. It's always good.
No, but we treasure you just as much. We miss all that time.
We do. We do. Leslie Sanchez, it's always so great to talk to you, my friend. Thank you.
No, thank you, my friend.
All right, so for more on what this could mean for the presidential campaigns, let's bring in Joel Payne. He's a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. So, Joel, the news comes, this news about the president comes after months of the president downplaying the severity of the illness. How might the Biden campaign's messaging change in light of the diagnosis?
Well, on the actual illness itself and on coronavirus, I don't think the Biden campaign message changes much. They have been very public and their belief in kind of best practices from the CDC and wearing a mask and social distancing. They've obviously had a pared down campaign schedule. I've got a chance to look at some of the internal conversations or some of the internal talking points, rather, and I think it's a kind of re-emphasis of that. I think that the trick here is how do they talk about the president and some potential culpability for what happened here. And my suspicion is that they're going to be very cautious. That's on brand with the vice president. He is loath to be seen as kind of your, opportunistic politician who's going to take shots at the president. But also, I think it's wise right now, given the fact that we're very early in this. This is Friday. This is a day after the president's diagnosis. We could be looking at a very different situation on Sunday or Monday. Fortunately, we know that Barron Trump is tested negative, but there are other people around the president that could be exposed, and we don't know how they're going to react to this. So it's a very live, evolving situation, and I think that the Biden folks are going to be very careful not to get out over their skis here and not to overreact or kind of step out of bounds with any official words that are coming out of the campaign. I've heard from a lot of sources that the campaign has really put out the word to not talk a lot about this on the record to their talkers and their surrogates, and I think we've seen that reflected in their response this morning.
I went back, Joel, and I looked at a couple of other instances where presidents were laid low by disease, by something that incapacitated them. You had Woodrow Wilson. There was even a moment where I think Richard Nixon had knee surgery, and President Kennedy considered suspending his campaign. Those were probably different times when the sport of politics was a little bit more genteel. But what I think you're suggesting is that, and I think the key word there is not trying to capitalize. The whole world, the entire world, and specifically in this country, we can see the devastating impact of the coronavirus. We can see with our own eyes through the people that we have lost, our loved ones, our neighbors, our family members who have succumbed to this horrific disease. You don't need a political campaign to drive home the message that wearing a mask and socially distancing and washing your hands are safe and effective ways to try and mitigate the infection rates.
But Vlad, it's challenging, right, Joel, because the pandemic and the way the administration has dealt with the pandemic is a major campaign issue. I mean, prior to January, February, we were just talking about the economy and jobs and that sort of stuff. And this has shifted everything. So that is the challenge for the Biden campaign, that this was sort of a cornerstone of the campaign moving forward. Here's how I will be different than the president moving forward. I would have never let this happen, Joe Biden says. So do you continue with that or not, you know?
Yeah, I think that's an open question, Anne-Marie. And look, this is the dexterity that is required of a major general election campaign. You have to be ready for any circumstance. Look, the Biden team has Jennifer O'Malley Dillon at its helm, who is probably about the most experienced, trusted hand in the Democratic Party. So folks like me sleep better at night knowing that she's at the gears of the ship. But I will tell you, the real challenge in messaging here is multifaceted. It's, do you begin to use this as a part of your narrative for explaining why Joe Biden should be the president instead of Donald Trump? Some people may see that as in poor taste. You talked in your last segment with Leslie about a natural kind of rally around the president feel that we've seen in other moments. I think you do politically, you worry about that. And then also, I mean, there are other kind of technical issues like advertisements. There's a lot of advertisements on the air right now from Joe Biden that's pretty tough on Donald Trump. If the president's condition, God help us all, but if his condition deteriorates or changes in any way that becomes more serious, like it did with Boris Johnson, do you continue down that vein? There are a lot of open questions here to be considered. I think that's why you're going to see a very pared back response from the Biden campaign this morning and in the early hours of this. I think they're going to observe and see what happens. I think what's clear, though, is this is a moment that can serve as an example for a lot of Americans that have been very loath to take the advice of public health experts and really have kind of sided with the president on this. I think the president himself being a victim now of coronavirus, I do think may have a positive impact of getting folks, particularly his supporters, who have been more skeptical, to take this seriously.
It's an excellent point that you make there, Joel. And I guess, you know, the other question sort of becomes the Biden camp will have to sort of thread this needle, right? I mean, up until yesterday, they had said multiple times, the vice president has said that, you know, the responsibility for the people of this country who have succumbed to the virus, 200,000 people plus, was directly the responsibility and on the shoulders of the president of the United States. If the logical conclusion to that argument is to say that it is because of reckless behavior and the suggestion of reckless behavior, in other words, not wearing masks, or even going so far as to mock people who wear masks, and here is now the result, it's probably a way to thread the needle by saying, well, we're suggesting a different path.
Totally. And look, the hard part about this is all out in front of our face, right? I mean, right. Donald Trump 2 days ago, I heard him at a debate criticize Joe Biden for wearing a mask and he looked silly. Many people, there's reporting now that says a number of people in his entourage who were there were offered masks and they refused. The Biden camp, everybody was wearing masks. And that's not to say that that is the only reason. We don't even know when the transmission happened. We don't know whether Hope Hicks was the initial person who was transmitting or whether she got it from someone else, or, you know, we don't know what the circumstance was, but we do know that this president has prioritized business and prioritized campaigning and politics over good, common sense public health advice. And that has come back to be an issue now that he and his team have to contend with. And I think it does change the dynamics of this race, because I will tell you this, Donald Trump, every day he has to talk about coronavirus is a bad day for him politically. Now, it takes a different shape now that this is involving his personal health, which, by the way, is a national security issue. But every day Donald Trump has to talk about coronavirus, it hurts the president, because that is the anchor that drags down all of his numbers, his favorability, his ability in crisis, his economic numbers. All of them are impacted negatively by coronavirus. And we know for a fact that for the next month, coronavirus will be the dominant issue in American life. The president will not be out of the woods for at least 2 weeks. That means at least until the middle of this month, coronavirus will be a front page issue. We don't even know if the debates will go on as planned. So that, at a minimum, we know has really changed the dynamics of this race.
Yeah. And I want to ask you about that in terms of the debate, though, the next debate, which is supposed to be just in a couple of weeks, also the vice presidential debate as well. How does the campaign feel about the possibility of perhaps both of those debates being postponed or even canceled?
I don't know how you could, in good faith and favor, put folks in a room together where, and by the way, these aren't just any people. You have the current leader of our country, you have the potential future leader of our country, you have their spouses, you have their closest advisors. I mean, even think about this. Donald Trump has been in regular contact with Steven Mnuchin, who's been back and forth up Capitol Hill to talk to Nancy Pelosi, who's third in line for the presidency, and she's 80 years old, right? So she's got, comorbidities, so to speak, in terms of coronavirus. You have people who've been in touch with Amy Coney Barrett, potentially the next Supreme Court justice. They've talked about going full speed ahead with that. I think this changes everything. I don't know how you can be the Judiciary Committee and go on with a hearing for Amy Coney Barrett's nomination, given this what's happening. I don't know how business as usual can go on when this is a super spreader crisis at the highest levels of our government. I mean, we circled jets last night shortly before this announcement was made. This is a national security issue. Mike Pence will have to be on alert to potentially take the throes of power. I don't mean to be unnecessarily dramatic here, but that is the seriousness of this incident. And that is, by the way, the result of some of the president and his inner circle's choices in this moment.
Joel Payne, as always, my friend, thank you very much for your insight, your analysis. We really appreciate it. Thank you.